Thanks, Chris, and thank you to those who are going to listen to some ideas about how to teach reading skills in an online environment. So I'm going to run through very quickly a quick overview. I will start with who obviously is this webinar aimed at, what I'm actually going to cover, and then you can see before I start there are two quick things I want to mention, and then I'll get straight into the reading skills which I've listed there, not in order of importance, but just perhaps in order of ease of introducing them or ease of teaching them, if you like. So first of all, who are we aiming at? I'd like to think that what I'm about to talk about will be of particular benefit for newer or inexperienced teachers who have been using Off2Class, and give them some ideas about bulking up, if you like, and improving their teacher skills in the online environment. And secondly, I also hope that this will provide a bit of a refresh to more experienced and certainly some long-term users of Off2Class, because I think as we get in the habit of using something, we gain familiarity with it. We tend to choose normally the path of least resistance to get something done, and I think it is good as a bit of a retrain and a refresh, and hopefully I may not present new ideas to you, but hopefully I'll jig your memory as in something that you haven't done for a while, and yeah, this would be a good idea to do with particular students. What I'm going to cover is the idea of obviously boosting your students' reading skills when using Off2Class materials, and I want to make sure that you are always, teachers are always thinking about how they can use reading skills, even if the lesson or the slide that you are currently focused on is not. The reason for that is, as much as I love the Off2Class step-by-step curriculum and the standalone lessons, I fully appreciate that they, will work for a certain percentage, a certain portion of the time, 100%, in particular lessons, but that you will always need to be prepared, and adaptability is the skill that teachers need in an online environment. You need it in any environment, but the ability to adapt is extremely beneficial to teachers. So I want to talk about, if you're in an Off2Class slide and you see an opportunity, even if it's regarding listening, you might want to think about bringing a particular reading skill in, depending on what your students' needs are or how you're seeing the class going. I also, think that it's really good as teachers to have a guide as we're going through. It's very, as I said, I don't need to tell you that I like the Off2Class step-by-step curriculum, but I see that as an incredible support for you. But as you become more experienced and more familiar, what I think great teachers can do is actually not even use this as a crutch anymore. It's there when you need to come back to it, but in fact you have such a rapport with the material and such high skills at teaching that you're moving along and doing things at your own pace with the material in front of them. So you've got to the stage where you're becoming highly adaptive, even though you're using the same materials with different teachers. Two things I want to bring up, which are not really relevant to this particular theme of reading skills, but there are a couple of things that I've noticed as somebody who has been teaching online for a number of years. And one is that I think that you should have, if you teach online, especially for reading skills, but not just that, familiarity with a good online dictionary. And I also believe that means that you need to show, and you do need to show students how to use an online dictionary. So you and your student, in order to improve reading skills, should understand not only that there is stuff on an online dictionary, but it goes beyond just searching the word and finding the translation or finding the definition in English. There is so much information that a dictionary can provide, sometimes examples, the phonetic spelling perhaps, it's the part of speech, and of course example sentences. Did I just say that? But there's a lot in dictionaries, there are very, very good online dictionaries, Cambridge, Merriam-Webster, dictionary.com, a thesaurus, an online thesaurus. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, I think, if you are an online teacher and you're using Off2Class materials, I really suggest keeping your own notebook on the lessons and slides that we have. It's always great to store information that you used previously so that you will find that you will adapt the materials by having stuff also on the inbuilt canvas that's in the product itself, but having your own notes about when you come to a particular slide, there's something that you've done, there's an exercise that you've done before that deviates, but that works particularly well. So the two things, dictionary and keeping your own set of notes, I think, with the materials is highly beneficial. Okay, so I'll get on to the reading skills themselves. The first one is probably the most obvious one to teachers. It's the predicting and previewing, and it may not be seen specifically as a reading skill, but I will tell you that every image in the Off2Class step-by-step curriculum has been chosen with the idea that you can use those images to elicit and to predict what's going to be in the lesson. And while I said this might not be specific for reading skills, never underestimate what is in the image and the idea that you should spend time eliciting from your student or students the information that they already have. If you spend the time and ask some questions, elicit as much as you can, this helps you work out the level at which you want to teach the students. It also stops you perhaps from talking about things that they already know. And in the worst case scenario that you virtually don't elicit anything, you might even think as a teacher, okay, you know what, I'm foreseeing a disaster, I'm going to stop here. There's little interest or no knowledge. Do I think about moving forward, or do I just take the time and let's try something else? It's fair enough to say that we don't cover every topic at Off2Class that you could possibly talk about. And because of the nature of language teaching and that we have curriculum that's available for all people across the world, there will be a repetition of certain subjects because they're the subjects about which anybody can speak around the world. So if you find that students that day don't feel like talking about food or travel, absolutely move to the next one.
James, can I ask a question here, James? I think this is interesting. I don't want to stop you too much before we get to the reading part, but I did want to ask specifically about this because you've got an interesting image. I'm going to kind of come back to that image right now. So we've got this is the title slide of a unit, and it says travel adventures. So I just want to ask really practically for a moment, if you were the teacher and you were teaching this lesson and looking at this slide, what is the type of conversation or questions that you might ask a student before even getting into the first content slide based on this image?
Absolutely. First of all, I would say, what do you think, who do you think these people are, and what is their relationship to each other? What clothing are they wearing? And so what does that suggest about perhaps the difficulty of the adventure they're having? Do you think they are out for the day, or are they going for a week? That helps to bring the context in. I think it's pretty obvious that hopefully they're out for a weekend at most. You want to talk about the weather. And then I think you want to talk about, it's always great to get a tense in. So, what are they doing? Then you want to personalize it. Is this something that you enjoy doing? Have you done this before? Tell me about a time. You might not, you want to elicit as much as you possibly can. So that's what I would go. The longer you do this as well, the longer you elicit, the more questions you ask, the more chance you have of a student coming back and actually personalizing the lesson, perhaps with something extremely random, such as, I have a t-shirt in that color. But once you've personalized, you've got them. You generally have your students' motivation worked in because they're into the lesson.
I think that is so important because sometimes what I think can happen with teachers is they get this product, which is kind of a one-stop shop. Off2Class has all of the slides, it has all of the questions. And I think it is really easy for teachers to forget that the lesson slides are kind of a jumping off point for the teacher to personalize the lessons. And so sometimes I think I see teachers get stuck into, well, this is the first exercise, and then we have to go right from the first exercise to the next exercise. There's sometimes teachers don't take the freedom to say, we can have a conversation about this image. We can skip around. I can kind of use this as a tool to inspire my own creativity as a teacher. So I didn't want to get too deep into that, but I think that is so important, and I wanted to highlight that before you continue. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree that personalizing, and again, the way to do that is to elicit at the beginning of any lesson. Certainly when you come across here, for example, it becomes a little more concentrated because the students are going through, here's a prediction or a pre-reading slide. So it's very clear that what the instruction is for the student here, and the student is about to read a text. Again, this is a final opportunity for you to elicit as much information as you possibly can. And here I would also go for adjectives. This is great to start talking about tall and flat or basic or small. Anything you can get into the language here that the student may think about being, sorry, got myself tongue-tied. Anything that is going to assist you to, elicit language that's going to assist with the comprehension of the text. So the idea here, for example, is you could also ask questions that relate to what's going to happen next. What clues are telling you that's going to happen next? Okay, it's pretty clear that a waterfall is going to appear. What relationship is that going to have with the plane? I'm not sure, but and also as a post reading, you'd want to ask, were the predictions that you made correct? These are really good skills as well that you can encounter or use when teaching multiple students. I know that online a lot of people are starting to use breakout rooms, so you can get people together and people work very well together, kind of working out what the story is going to be before they get there. The next skill that I want to mention is skimming. And the idea of skimming is you just move across the text in a very quick fashion in order to get an idea or a gist of what the text is about. So what you will want to do is, first of all, impose a time limit. Okay, you have 30 seconds to view the text and be very specific about you just want an idea of what the text is about. It doesn't matter what time frame you go for. It doesn't matter if you go over that time frame with a student, but the idea is to impose a little bit of pressure, which creates that anxiety to get the task finished, and don't let them read that for the slide that you see there. Don't let the student read for 3 minutes. You could even think about showing the slide, going back one slide and saying, okay, I'm going to show you that slide again. You will have 30 seconds to do it, so you can really build up a bit of pressure. It's a great reading skill to have because we often skim things, all of us in an age of information with so much available on the line. We spend our lives, we never really read a lot of things in depth anymore. We skim for the information that we need, and we're always skimming to get the gist of something. So here on the right, you can see there are more specific questions about the text that you would leave after. But here's a great opportunity, even though we haven't put it in the teaching notes, to skim for the particular, to get the gist of the overall text. Time limits required there. Sometimes you can do that simply even if you have a title, a heading, a subheading, and even something like a caption. That might be enough to help you to get the gist of it. But it's all about imposing a time limit. The same thing here. You've actually got a listening text, but after, having done the listening, why not go back and do a reading here as well? You can impose a very short time limit because they have actually heard it, allow them to skim it, and again go through, and you've used the text in another, to check on another skill. Next, I'm going to go in talking about scanning. So scanning is very similar to skimming, but skimming is the idea of running to get the gist of something. Scanning material is to find specific information. I won't spend a lot of time on this because it's something that all of us do as teachers quite naturally, is get students to look for specific information. So you will find that a lot of the questions at the lower levels are about looking for a tense or a particular word, a synonym of a word in the text, or the opposite of a word, or a word that find a word that shows the meaning of such and such. So scanning is a particularly good reading skill, but I think it's the one that probably gets used. There's a risk of overdoing scanning because you can pull a text apart to pieces ad nauseum. So we already offer a lot of scanning activities and looking for specific information, but it's something. It's probably something that you're probably already doing if you're teaching online. The next thing I wanted to mention is that summarizing is a great skill to be showing. So it helps students to separate the most important information in a text from text which is maybe irrelevant or perhaps even a little bit off topic. So when you're doing a supporting reading, if you're going for a summarizing activity, remember that it is a reading skill here to summarize it, but you could follow that up by getting them to write that down, writing a summary of the text. And you can see here that the example I've shown is one that is a gap fill. As you know, if you use the teaching tools, the student can actually click on these gaps, type in and have a complete text. And from there, for example, you could go into a summary of it, because although it's a closed activity, it's fairly obvious that you're filling in the blanks. Why not go back once you've got the complete text and do a summary of this, or something where they might say, what do you think the heading for this would be, rather than just Joseph is learning Russian, which is clearly just actually what it is. What's something else? Who is it aimed at? Things like that. For students with higher proficiency, there's 3 skills that I want to mention. I won't say at which proficiency level the students need to be, but if you have students who are thinking in particular about taking any of the big standardized tests, and TOEFL and IELTS in particular, there are some specific skills that will be asked for in those texts, especially in reading and listening. And so I want to just cover those briefly as well. One of them is inferring, and the idea of inferring is what the author might speculate about the text. The idea is that you are going to read between the lines, and it's something that you would do after you've gone through the text. So the author may state something, but then you're looking for things that they haven't actually stated, but that you can infer from what you already have as evidence. And that's a really good skill because, as I said, we often need to read between the lines, especially, well, maybe not especially today, but we often need to read between the lines of what we are actually reading to get a secondary or perhaps a hidden meaning in the text itself. And it's also, as I said, it is tested in the standardized test, so it's a great skill to have. I would also say that if you're a very inexperienced teacher, do not stress too much yourself about having to teach inference at this point. It's something that you would be comfortable with once you have gained familiarity with the teaching tools that you're using, whether it's Off2Class or another book. It's only through familiarity that you would really, in the course of a lesson, be able to adapt and ask questions about inference. The other skill, the second to last skill that I wanted to talk about, is the idea of both the aim of the article and the author's opinion. One thing that students often fail to do, and that we even do as people who read a lot, is we often don't understand the aim. We don't think about the aim of the article. And although the aim of the article, most of the articles in Off2Class is going to be, will have a language skill attached to it and that they've been written for English language students, please be aware that it's a great skill to have in life, especially in the day of social media, to give something as much context as it can possibly have. And that means, what was the author's opinion about the topic that they are writing on? And what was the specific aim of the article? And even if you have time, who is this article aimed at? The idea of the level of the language that has been used, the formality of the language register, anything that helps you guide. We all write with a purpose, and it's very good for students to understand what the author intended the purpose of that article to be, and especially to whom, the audience to whom the author was writing. The final thing that I think has become perhaps more important than ever in terms of skill, what I call claims versus facts. In today's age, and especially perhaps with the rise of social media, and not even social media, back to the internet, the fact is we are overflowing with information in our lives today, and it's very easy in a fully democratized internet for anyone to essentially publish anything and of course state it as fact. But there is language that you can look for, and I think this is a really important skill for students to have, no matter whether it's a listening activity or a reading activity, is that they want to listen. A lot can be delivered in the tone, but you have to go very deep into the language to find proof. And the verbs that people will use, obviously, if you say something with the verb be, they're claiming it as they're stating a fact or believe it's a fact. And then you've got words like suggestions that claim that provide evidence that it's more of a claim than an actual fact. And this can be a really good point for you, a launching point for discussion around what is true and what is false, and also what one person believes, another person will be able to dispute. As in all healthy debates, you want to be able to provoke, perhaps not as the right word, but you want to encourage students to engage in a healthy debate with the skills that they have. And that's always to get students to a particular skill where they can feel comfortable talking about perhaps more controversial or sensitive topics is a great state for a teacher to be in. You have a lot of flexibility, provided that you are able to maintain a healthy dialogue between the students. So that's really it. That's what I wanted to cover, just to give some of you perhaps an insight into how you can approach the activities the materials that you find, that you come across. And hopefully for some of the more experienced teachers, you've just had a bit of a refresh or an aha moment. I haven't done that for a while. So yeah, back to you, Chris.
I think the most important thing that I want to say in response to this is to talk about how what you shared today is the difference between just being a normal English teacher and being a teacher that your students love, not love like they think you're a great person, but love like they so clearly see the value that you're bringing to them. Because anybody can, even someone who has no training at all as an English teacher, anybody can be given a set of slides and say, okay, here's slides. And this is what a lot of teachers do. They're like, okay, well, why don't you read this out loud? Okay, now I'm going to ask you these 3 questions. Okay, I guess we're going to move on to the next slide. The difference between that and a teacher where the student so clearly sees the value is when, as a teacher, you are able to explain why you are doing what you're doing with the student. Because as teachers, we can forget the reason that things are important and get stuck in this day-to-day. And then the student can forget why they're learning this. So I think one of the things that I try to do as a teacher is I always try to make it clear to my students, hey, listen, student, one of the things that we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about skimming. We're not just going to read and answer questions, but I want to tell you the context that fits into skimming. Okay, we're going to talk about skimming, and why is skimming important? Because when you're going to be presented with textual information all of the time, and if it takes you 15 minutes to read every 5-line email that you receive, you're not going to get anything else done. So in order to make you more efficient at work, what we're going to do is we're going to specifically work on this skill of skimming. Does that sound okay to you? Now what you've done with this student is you make the student say, oh boy, there's a real purpose to what I'm about to learn. Instead of it just being like they were children, because this is what you do with children. Children in school look at the slide, read the text, answer the questions. Children don't have a connection to why this is important for my life, and that's why so many children don't like school. So with adults who are often voluntarily taking classes with you, it's so important to connect to them with why you're teaching these skills. And this is why, as teachers,